Hey guys, it's Mike from Eldorado Guitars, and I'm here today with some cocktail chatter to talk about why Randall Smith was fired from Mesa Boogie. Okay, so if you haven't read the news this week, there was a lot of rumors going around about Randall Smith, the founder of Mesa Boogie, you know, the original OG guy, right? Was fired, supposedly, by Gibson Guitars, allegedly, right? Was fired by Gibson Guitars. A lot of people said maybe he retired. A lot of people said, you know, maybe he's not really gone, yada, yada. But several prominent people, including the YouTuber Fluff, who is a former Mesa artist and has done a lot of work with Mesa Boogie, posted in a Facebook group that Randall was indeed fired and that employees were told he was retiring, but they didn't believe that for a second. Right, and some other places have come out and said that, you know, it's true that Randall was fired. So let's talk a little bit about that. So I want to kind of talk about, you know, what is this? Why did it happen? You know, let's speculate wildly, right? This is the internet. And then kind of what should you do about it, you know? So, all right, first things first. Let's talk about potential reasons why Randall Smith could have been fired, right? So I work in the tech industry, right? In tech startups specifically. And so, you know, I'm very aware of acquisitions and what that means for companies and how companies change when they're acquired by other companies or by, you know, venture capital firms or, you know, whatever it may be. It's pretty common for the founders to stay on for a period of time, usually 1 to 2 years, and then they'll usually exit, you know, as part of the deal because they want to go on and do something else, you know, start some other company or whatever. And the people who bought the company by that point probably kind of want them out of the way, right? Because they're trying to run the company their way. So that's one possibility, right? It's possible that, you know, I think Randall sold the company to Gibson in 2021 or 2022, right? So it's been a couple of years. So one possibility is maybe Randall's time with, you know, Mesa Boogie, Gibson owned Mesa Boogie, just, you know, ran its course, right? Like that's a possibility. Maybe it just ran its course. You know, maybe it was just time for Randall to go. Now, why don't I believe that? Because there's a lot of sources out there saying that that's not what happened, right? But it is technically possible, right? That maybe that's what happened, right? Another thing that could have happened is, you know, maybe Randall retired, right? Maybe he just decided it was time to hang it up. I mean, that's, you know, he's 80 years old. He's going to go down in history as one of the, you know, preeminent amp scholars, right? Amp guys of his time, of all time, right? I mean, he's right up there with Jim Marshall, right? I mean, him and Jim Marshall are, you know, the two big guys, right? So maybe he did want to retire. Why don't I believe that? Again, same reason, right? Like a lot of people are saying that, you know, it was definitely not a retirement, right? So what do I think is probably really the most likely outcome? I think when you think about it, this theory makes a lot of sense. And I want to be clear, this is just totally speculation on my part, right? But I'm basing this off of objective things in reality. So think about the company Mesa Boogie, right? Think about the actual company. What is Mesa Boogie's kind of thing? What do they do? Mesa Boogie is all about pushing boundaries, right? They're all about the spirit of art and technology, right? They're all about cutting edge, modern players, right? The first players who played Mesa Boogies were people that didn't like Marshalls and Fenders, right? You know, like John Petrucci or whoever, right? They wanted John Sykes, right? They wanted modern sounds. They wanted something different. They didn't want the same old Marshall. They didn't want a Fender, right? They wanted something new, something modern, something different. And that's kind of what Randall Smith, you know, stoked his reputation on, right? Was innovation, always innovation, 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 innovation. Think of all the new amps Randall Smith has made, right? I mean, he made, you know, the Mark amps, Mark II, Mark III, right? Mark IV, Mark V, now Mark VII, right? He's made the rectifiers, all kinds of different rectifiers, 2-channel, 3-channel, multi-watt. And then he's made kind of like side hustle amps, the California Tweed series, the Nomad series, the Badlanders, the Express series, the F50 or whatever it's called, right? I mean, there's so many that the Heartbreaker, the Maverick Blue Angel, right? I mean, they've done so many amps over the years, right? Way more than Marshall, way more, right? So why am I telling you this? So Randall Smith stakes his reputation on making new and interesting amps, being at the cutting edge of amp technology, right? Modern, all of that stuff. Gibson is basically the exact fucking opposite, right? Gibson is the exact opposite. Gibson is perfectly content selling the same guitars they've sold forever, reissuing the same guitars they've reissued forever, Murphy labbing guitars, right? Like Gibson is very in the business of reissuing. They want to reissue, right? They want to reissue Les Pauls. We have a 68, a 54, 59, a 60. You can even custom order like 1974 reissues, right? Like you can, they're even reissuing 90s Les Pauls right now, right? Like the Jerry Cantrell Les Paul is a 90s Les Paul custom that they're reissuing. They just reissued the Kirk Hammett Les Paul from like 1988 or something, right? I mean, like they reissue Slash Les Pauls from the 80s, right? So Gibson loves to reissue. Mesa Boogie does not, okay? So I can absolutely see a world in which Randall Smith is like, hey, look, I don't want to become Marshall. Right? Marshall's making the same fucking 5 amps forever, right? The Plexi, right? There's the Super Lead, the fucking, what else am I thinking? The Super Lead, the JCM 800, the JCM 900, they all the reissues, the JTM 45, right? I mean, they've made basically the same 5 amps for fucking ever, right? Jim Marshall died in 2000, when did he die? 2010 or something, 2009? And Marshall's innovation died with it. Because something tells me Jim Marshall and Randall Smith are like birds of a feather, right? They're guys that wanted to give players what they want. Newer amps, interesting amps, right? Different things like that, right? And companies like Gibson are just not interested in that, right? They know that there is money to be made off of Mesa Boogie. Okay, hold on, I'm gonna take a sip. This, by the way, is a margarita with tequila ocho that I just made, which is excellent. It's very hot today. So, basically, right, Gibson wants to reissue everything. And they know that there's money to be made in reissues, okay? There's money to be made in reissuing the Mark II C+. There is money to be made in reissuing dual channel rectifiers. There is money to be made in maybe like a Mark I reissue or something. I know they did it once before, but like maybe in a bigger role, right? There's a lot of money to be made by reissuing, right? And I could even see Gibson wanting to do more than just reissues, but signature amps. Here's a copy of John Sykes 2C++. Here's a Murphy Lab version, right, of John Sykes's, and I know this sounds insane, right? I mean, I understand it sounds crazy, like, Mike, who's gonna buy a beat up fucking amp just because John Sykes's name on it? You would be surprised, right? How many people own a Murphy Lab guitar? A lot of people. How many own a Relic Strat? A lot of people, right? So like, those things make a lot of money. So don't think that it's beyond Gibson to do that, right? So Gibson basically, I think, bought Mesa Boogie with the intention of like, hey, we're gonna reissue all that stuff, right? Because why do you do it? First, let's just talk really quickly, side conversation. Why do you do a reissue? The reason companies do reissues is because the original price is too high. Okay, so the reason why 1959 Les Pauls are reissued is because real 1959 Les Pauls cost a fortune. The reason 1954 Strats get reissued is because real 1954 Strats cost a fortune, right? So the idea is we can reissue it, charge a lot of money for it, but not as much as that super premium price. And this doesn't even happen with expensive vintage guitars, even modern guitars, right? Like Fender just did the Tom DeLonge Stratocaster reissue, right? And they sold like hotcakes. They even did like 3 limited runs or something in different colors, right? Because they're making money hand over fist reissuing these things because the used market had gone up so much, right? The Tom DeLonge Strats were selling for a ton of money. And so Fender was like, hey, there's money to be made here. We can make a reissue that's half the cost or 2/3 of the cost, and people will buy it because it's new, it's a reissue, something they love, right? They already know it, they already understand it, they already know they love it, so they're just gonna empty their pockets, right? Okay, back to our main conversation. So what does Gibson want to do? Gibson wants to reissue all these fucking amps, right? Because there's money to be made, right? There's guys out there who want a 2C plus but don't want to pay $10,000, right? So Gibson wants, I suspect very strongly, wants to reissue the 2C plus. I already know they want to reissue the 2-channel dual rectifier, and I'll put a picture in just a second that I took from Instagram, like 2 years ago or something. I'll get the exact date when I get off the video, but I have a screen capture of the prototype 2-channel rectifier. Okay, so you know that's already coming. All right, it's already coming. And I strongly suspect they're going to reissue the 2C Plus. They might even reissue other Mesas over time, or issue different versions of the 2C, right? It might be like 2C Plus, 2C Plus Plus. It might be like a simulclass version, a Coliseum, or whatever, right? Like they'll do different runs of these different things, right? So Gibson knows there is a fortune to be made by reissuing Mesa Boogie's back catalog of amps, right? Randall Smith, I do not suspect, wants to spend his twilight years reissuing amps for Gibson that he made 40 years ago. I don't think that that's his interest, because as I said, Randall Smith has always been like a cutting edge, very modern amp maker kind of guy, right? I don't think he has any issue in remaking old amps from 40 years ago, right? A lot of people ask, why don't they reissue the Diesel Blueface, right? Down here at the bottom, you can't see it, right? Why don't they reissue that? My suspicion is very similar. I don't think Peter Diesel wants to spend his twilight years, he's probably in his like 70s now or something, 60s or 70s, right? He probably doesn't want to spend his twilight years making an amp that he made 30 years ago, right? He wants to make new amps, new revisions of his amp, new versions of the amp for the modern player, right? And that's what Randall Smith wants to do. And this is counter to what Gibson wants to do. Gibson knows there's a ton of money to be made on old amps, on reissuing old amps, right? So my suspicion, getting back to the very beginning of why we had this conversation, my speculation is the reason why Randall Smith probably got fired is probably because he gave him a bunch of lip about not wanting to remake the same fucking amps he made 40 years ago. And Gibson was probably like, well then you know what? You can get the fuck out because we own the company now and we own your amps. So guess what we're gonna do? We're gonna do it ourselves, right? We own the company now, right? There's a line in Mad Men. Mad Men is one of my favorite shows. And I think in season 3, I think it's season 3, Sterling Cooper, which is the ad agency that Don Draper and company work for, they get sold to Putnam, Powell and Lowell, which is a British advertising agency, right? But at one point, Don and Roger don't like what's going on with all these changes, right? And they don't like being controlled by this other company and da-da-da. So they go up to see the head boss at Sterling Cooper, whose name is Bert Cooper, right? The old man. And Bert tells them, we took their money. We have to do what they say. That's the deal. Right? That's the deal we made, right? And so I think maybe Randall Smith got a similar bite in the ass, right? Where it's like, he probably went to Gibson and was like, hey man, I don't want to do this. I don't think we should do that. I've got ideas for new amps. Here they are, blah, blah. And Gibson was probably like, you took our money. That's the deal, right? Like, we tell you what to do and we're telling you to reissue shit, right? And I suspect Randall did not want to do that, and that's probably why he got fired. Right? Because as soon as you're not a culture fit, right? As soon as you're an agitator or you try and tell management that you know better than them, and believe me, I'm one of these people, okay? I am guilty of this to a fucking T, okay? Because like, I always think I have a good barometer on these things, and so I'm very open at my jobs about telling management like what they're doing wrong, right? Which is why I work at startup companies, because that's the only place that anybody wants to hear that shit, right? If I go to a giant cybersecurity company, they're not going to want to listen to me, right? So I think this is a similar situation with Randall, right? So that's my suspicion as to why he got fired. Okay, number 2. So number 2 is like, okay, so what should I do, right? So Randall Smith is fired, what should I do, right? Do all of a sudden my amps go up in price? Should I hold on to my Boogies? What should I do, right? Okay, well, so look, here's the thing I'm gonna tell you. Mesa Boogie has the same problem as Marshall, which is that there's a lot of used amps out in the wild, okay? So I'm really confused as to like who's buying a new Plexi, like who goes, you know what, I'm gonna buy a 2024 Marshall 1959 Super Lead, right? Like, I'm baffled by that decision. There's so many used Super Leads out on the market, frankly, that have better transformers, better components, yada yada from back in the day, right? I mean, even the 90s ones are great. Why would you buy a new one, right? So Marshall has a problem where like they're not really selling a lot of new amps because there's a lot of used inventory out there. And I think Mesa Boogie has the same problem, right? There's a lot of Mesas out there. I mean, I think rectifiers alone are at the 30,000 serial mark, right? So there's like 30,000 rectifiers in the world alone, right? Alone, not counting all the marks, all the other amps that I mentioned before, the Badlanders, the blah, blah, or whatever it is, right? So is there gonna be like some like drive up on the price of Mesa Boogie immediately? No. because it's not like saying, you know, oh, like what's a good example? Like, okay, I have a Karsten's amplification amp over here, right? It's not like, oh, Brian Karsten's died and there's only, you know, 200 Graces in the world, so those Graces are going to be worth a lot more, right? There's thousands, tens of thousands of Mesa Boogies out in the wild, right? So I don't think there's going to be any, like, in the short term, I don't think there's going to be any, like, pre-Gibson Boogies. However, I think in like 10 to 20 years, there will be. Okay, I think in 10 to 20 years, it will be a thing, like pre-Gibson Boogies. I think that will be a thing eventually, but not in the short term. So don't panic. Don't run out and sell your Boogies. Don't say, oh, I'm gonna hold on to them now for dear life, because it's like, look, there's gonna be plenty of used Boogies around, okay? I don't think it's gonna be like any kind of issue like that, okay? So the first thing I would say is like, don't panic, okay? Second thing I would say is, you know what really is gonna suck, okay? So like, don't worry about like the shortage of amps or anything like that, but what is gonna suck? Service. Service is gonna suck. So if you've ever tried to get your Mesa Boogie worked on, techs hate them, okay? All techs hate working on Mesa Boogies. I mean, there's a million videos on the internet about it. Who's that guy, the guitarologist or whatever? He's a really funny guy. He has a YouTube channel. You can check it out. Anytime he opens a Mesa, he's like, fuck me, right? Because it's a million boards and parts and wires. It's like a snarl of stuff in there, right? It's not like a Marshall or a Fender that's pretty simple, right? Mesas are very complicated. So the thing that's gonna suck is service. Because at least as of this recording, you can still send your amp in to Mike B. Mike B is Mike Bendinelli. He's Mesa's second oldest employee after Randall Smith. I believe he was the first employee that Randall hired. And so Mike does all the mods and service. So like if you send your, you know, I sent my 2C Plus to him last year, right? He does all the service. He calls you, he talks to you, or he writes you an email, he talks to you, right? Like yada, yada, yada. So I think, you know, and there's been rumors for quite some time that Mike is going to retire. So if Randall's gone and Mike retires, I do get a little bit nervous about service on Boogies, because Gibson is not known to have the best service. If you've ever tried to, you know, do Gibson's warranty service or anything like that, it's pretty awful, right? And so I do think there's a world in which the service could become an issue. Now, one thing that I will tell you guys as followers of my channel, okay, so I think if you followed my channel, you know that other than the Boogies, all of my amps are maintained by Dave Friedman, because he's right up the way in LA. So I always take all my amps to Dave, whether they're Friedman's or not, right? Like I took this Jubilee to him to get, you know, rebiased and cleaned up and everything. You know, I took, what else have I taken to him? My two Friedmans I've taken to him. I took him an old Soldano. I've taken him a bunch of stuff, right? So one thing I will tell you is the guy that works with Dave, at least the last time I checked, Dave only had one employee, I believe. And that employee used to be the lead tech at Mesa Boogie Hollywood when that store was open. So Mesa used to have a big store in Hollywood that closed, I think, right before COVID. So my advice to you would be contact Dave Friedman if you've got a Boogie that needs service once Mike B is gone, right? As long as Mike B is there, you're fine. But once Mike B retires, or let's say like he rage quits because of Randall, right? Like, I don't know, right? My advice would be go to Dave Friedman. Because I mean, that guy is probably going to be one of the top techs in the country for Boogies, because Mike B gone, Randall gone, right? Like, it's probably going to be your best option. Please do this for me. Don't take your Boogie to some shit local tech. Okay, please don't do it. I know mailing an amp to somebody is a pain in the ass, but if you've got a great old Boogie that you love, please don't take it to some shitty local tech, or for God's sake, don't send it to Guitar Center. I see people walking into Guitar Center with like expensive guitars, expensive amps. Don't take your shit to Guitar Center to get it worked on, okay? Do not do that. All right, so I think that's your best option for service. Okay, so I think that's kind of number two. What do you do now? Hold on to your Boogies, panic slightly about service, okay? But I gave you a little hint for that, okay? All right, so number three. Number three, where do things go from here? Okay, so we talked about Randall fired. What do I do now? Where do things go from here? You know, I think the amp industry is really in a spot of turmoil right now, because a lot of the OG guys are getting out of the game. Jim Marshall's dead. Randall Smith fired, right? Who knows what he'll do? Probably retired. right? Reinhold Bogner is getting up in years, right? You know, I mean, Peter Diesel is getting up in years, right? I mean, now I'm not saying that means they're bad or anything. I'm just saying that, like, you know, if Peter Diesel retired in 5 years, in the next 5 to 10 years, would anybody be surprised? I mean, I wouldn't, right? I mean, you know, if Reinhold Bogner retired in the next 10 years, would I be surprised? No, I mean, they don't even have a website anymore, right? So it's like, you know, I would not be shocked, right? So I feel like the kind of old guard of amp guys is kind of nearing the end of their career. So the question is, where do we go from here? And the answer is younger builders, new builders, right? Making new sounds, making alterations on old sounds, right? So I think the future of amp making isn't in like because a lot of people are saying, well, what's Randall Smith going to do now? Is he going to go start a new company? And, you know, people were joking it's going to be called Randall Amps. You know, they'll give you a solid deal. Okay, but you get what I'm saying, right? Okay, I don't think that that's the future of amps. And great, if Randall goes and makes new amps, I'm very happy, but that's not the future of amps, right? The future of amps are guys like Dave Friedman, Jason Tong, Brian Karstens, Jeremy from Ground Zero, right? Who else? I'm trying to think, you know, I'm brain farting. I'm trying to remember other amp makers, right? These are the Kyle from KSR, right? The guys from Rev, right? These are the future of guitar amps. These guys are the future of guitar amps, right? So if you're sitting there saying to yourself, wow, I'd like to have something like 30 years from now that's like a 2C plus, like, or an old Plexi in like value, right? Like, oh, I have an original XYZ. Buy a Karstens, right? Buy an old Friedman. I mean, Friedman's been out for a while, right? But buy a Headfirst Alta. Buy a Ground Zero Hellion, right? Buy a Rev, right? Like, get something, that, you know what I mean? Like, get something now, because these guys are going to become the future of amps. So I think that's the direction we're going, right? So instead of like relying on the old builders and saying like, oh, what's Marshall doing? Oh, nothing. What's Mesa doing? Oh, they're reissuing all their old shit, right? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. If you want an old 2C Plus, go buy it, right? Like, I don't care. If you want a reissue of a 2C Plus, go buy it. I don't care, right? But I think the future of amps is in guys like Jason Tong, in guys like Brian Karstens, in guys like Jeremy from Ground Zero, right? These guys are the future of amps. So while I'm sad to see, Randall go, and I'm sad to see Jim Marshall die, and I'm sad to see some of these older builders get out of the game, I am simultaneously very excited about these new builders because they're making amazing amps. I mean, if you've never played a Headfirst Alta, it's dope. It's a great amp. I mean, it's like the JCM 800 type thing of your dreams, right? If you've never played, a Karstens Grace, I mean, it's like a Soldano and a train wreck had a baby. It's awesome, right? I mean, it sounds killer. If you want something ultra modern, right? Jeremy from Ground Zero, his amps are super modern, and he's working on a really fucking cool amp right now that's like a rectifier preamp with a Marshall power section. I mean, that sounds awesome, right? So I think like those types of things are the future of amps. So if you're interested in amps and you're interested in like, how can I be one of these guys that has a lot of cool amps 20 or 30 years from now? I think go look at those guys now. Go talk to those guys, And the beauty of talking to those kind of guys is they answer you, right? You can't really email Marshall. You can't really email Randall Smith, right? Like, but you can email Brian Karstens. You can email Dave Friedman. You can email Jason Tong, right? And they will answer you, and you can talk with them and come up with an amp that works for you, So I think it's still an exciting time. I think, despite Randall being fired, it's still a really exciting time to be a guitarist and to be in tube amps because we have more amps than ever before, more access to people and things than ever before, and I think more to look forward to than ever before. But I think that, the industry is moving on and moving forward, and I think we're just going to see a lot of reissues of Boogies and Marshalls and Fenders, and we're going to continue to see new amps from these smaller, more exciting makers. So cheers, guys. I'm going to go drink the rest of this margarita. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. Again, this is Mike from Eldorado Guitars. Like and subscribe. Thanks for hanging out, guys.